Have you ever stopped to think about the exact moment when The Simpsons stopped portraying Mr. Burns as just a grumpy, rich old man and started turning him into something far bigger and far more terrifying? Because there is a point in the series where Burns is no longer simply the greedy boss of the nuclear plant and becomes almost a creature, a symbol of everything cold, rotten, and inhuman that exists inside Springfield. And once you notice that the character changes completely before your eyes, the first time I realized this was when I rewatched some of the older episodes. I had always thought Burns was just a recurring joke, the frail billionaire who looks like he has one foot in the grave, the cranky old man who does not understand how normal people live. But when you really pay attention, you see something much deeper. From the very beginning, the writers were slowly transforming him into something else, something darker, something that stops being human and becomes a living metaphor of unchecked power, a walk-in representation of greed without limits, an ego without control. And this transformation does not happen suddenly. The Simpsons always exaggerated their humor, but with Mr. Burns, the construction is deliberate. Episode after episode, they push him further away from humanity until he becomes essentially a monster, not only in Treehouse of Horror specials, but in regular episodes too. The first key to understanding. This is simple and powerful. Too much power without empathy turns anyone into a dangerous creature, and Mr. Burns represents exactly that. He is the embodiment of total corruption, a man so rich and so disconnected from reality that his morality and humanity have evaporated completely. The series shows this from the beginning. Burns does not see people as people. He sees employees, numbers, disposable parts he cannot remember, anyone's name he does not acknowledge, suffering he does not comprehend, danger or responsibility he does not feel. Sympathy or regret, this constant dehumanization, is the first step in his monstrous evolution. The Simpsons never relied on traditional villains by accident. Burns was created as a social monster, someone who represents everything power destroys inside the human mind. And this becomes even clearer when we remember iconic episodes like the one where Burns tries to block out the sun entirely, just to force the entire town to depend on his power plant. In that moment, he is not behaving like a human being anymore. He is acting like a force of evil, someone willing to plunge the world into darkness for profit, smiling as he does it because to him, the world exists only to serve his will. And here we reach the first practical key of this video. The Simpsons did not turn Mr. Burns into a monster using blood, claws, or fangs. They did it with something far more frightening, the complete absence of empathy. When a character loses the ability to care, they stop being a regular villain and become something symbolically monstrous. Now we shift back to the curiosity, because if you think blocking the sun, extreme weight, until you see how the series pushes Burns even deeper into the abyss. The writers did not want him to be just cruel. They wanted him to represent a specific category of evil, the kind that grows silently with wealth, power, influence, and a total lack of humanity. Because grabbing attention at the beginning is easy, but the real impact appears when we understand how and why he changed so dramatically over the years. And this brings us to the most important point of this block. Mr. Burns did not become a monster by accident. He was crafted this way slowly, episode by episode, exaggeration by exaggeration, metaphor by metaphor, until he became the perfect representation of what happens when someone's ego grows larger than their heart. This is the beginning of the story, and now that this foundation is set, the next part becomes even more shocking because it isn't. The next stage is that Burns stops being metaphorically monstrous and begins crossing into literal horror. If the first stage of Mr. Burns' transformation was losing his humanity, the second stage is where the series begins to shape him into something that looks and behaves like an actual creature, something beyond human flaws, something built to symbolize fear, corruption, and decay. And this shift happens gradually, almost invisibly, until suddenly you realized he is no longer just an old man, but a figure closer to a myth than a person. One of the clearest examples is how the show changes his physical presence. Over time, Burns moves. Strangely, he stands. Hunched over, he has long skeletal fingers. His eyes sink deeper into his skull, and his skin becomes impossibly pale. He begins to resemble a corpse, more than a living man, and every season pushes this exaggeration further. Some episodes even show him glowing in the dark or making sounds that no human throat should produce. All of this builds the idea that Burns has crossed the line from man to monster, but the transformation goes beyond appearance. It is embedded in how Springfield reacts to him when Burns walks into a room. The air changes. People stiffen, tremble, shrink away even. Homer, who is usually fearless in his stupidity, treats Burns with a mixture of fear and confusion, as if encountering a dangerous animal rather than a boss. This reaction is intentional. The writers want you to feel that Burns is not part of the community. He stands outside it, above it, feeding on it like a parasite. Then comes one of the most symbolic moments in the entire series, the episode where Burns is shot. Who shot Mr. Burns is more than a joke or a mystery. It is the moment when the town collectively agrees that Burns has crossed the line. He has sucked so much life out of Springfield that the town almost subconsciously rises against him. The shooting becomes a reflection of how far he has fallen in the eyes of everyone around him. Not a victim, but a monster that someone finally tried to stop him. And yet, even after being shot, he returns more monstrous than before, almost immortal. As if bullets and injuries cannot truly harm him. This is another layer of his transformation. Burns is portrayed as something that cannot be destroyed by normal means. No matter what happens to him, he always comes back. Thinner, weaker, creepier, but never gone. Now we enter the part of the series that embraces this fully. The Treehouse of Horror specials, and these episodes take his transformation from metaphor to literal monster. These are episodes where Burns becomes a vampire, a grotesque creature with wings, a mutated beast, or an alien-esque figure dripping with radiation, his body twisting and stretching in ways that go far beyond reality. Yet the viewers accept it because deep down, the show had already convinced us that Burns was never truly human in the first place. And here we reach the second key of this entire topic. The Simpsons turn Mr. Burns into a monster to expose a truth about power. Absolute power makes someone untouchable, unpunished, unstoppable. And when a person reaches that level, they no longer play by the rules of humanity. They exist in a space outside it the same way a monster does. You can see the writers leaning into this symbolism more and more, especially in episodes where Springfield must unite against him for survival, like the one where he steals the town's oil, or the one where he creates robot dogs to chase people through the streets. These moments show him not as a businessman, but as a tyrant, a villain, a creature that feeds off the suffering of others and delights in it. And yet, the series never treats this transformation as unrealistic, because Burns becoming a monster feels like the natural evolution of who he already was from the beginning. He was selfish, cold, and disconnected. The supernatural exaggeration only makes visible what was already inside him. The monster was always there. The show simply allowed it to grow. As we reach the end of this block one, thing becomes clear, Mr. Burns does not need fangs, claws, or wings to be terrifying. His true horror comes from the complete absence of empathy, the bottomless hunger for control, and the joy he feels in watching Springfield suffer the supernatural. Episodes merely reveal the truth that was always beneath the surface. Burns was becoming a monster long before the audience realized it. As Mr. Burns continues to descend into this monstrous form, the series begins to use him not only as a character, but as a symbol, a living embodiment of everything Springfield fears yet refuses to confront. Burns becomes the mirror of the town's darkest flaws: greed, carelessness, selfishness, and moral decay. And this transformation becomes clearer every time the show places him in situations that strip away the last fragments of humanity he once had. One of the strongest examples of this symbolism appears whenever Burns interacts with normal people, because his reactions are never human. He does not understand friendship, family, or community, and he treats every person around him as either a tool or an obstacle. This emotional emptiness is what makes him terrifying. He's not cruel because he enjoys pain. He is cruel because pain means nothing to him, and the absence of feeling is often more frightening than active cruelty. There are several moments in this series where Burns completely forgets that humans have needs like food, water, rest, or respect. He casually puts workers in danger, shrugs at accidents in the plant, and shows total indifference when someone is hurt or terrified. And yet, these scenes are played for comedy, which only amplifies the horror behind them, because when you laugh at Burns, you are also acknowledging how normal his monstrous behavior has become. As the seasons progress, Burns becomes increasingly dependent on Smithers, and this relationship reveals another layer of his transformation. Smithers treats him like a fragile deity, a creature that must be served, obeyed, and preserved, and this dynamic reinforces Burns as something above humanity, not because he is powerful, but because he has become isolated from the moral world. Smithers' devotion is not admiration, it is worship, and worship is often directed at monsters, not men. Then comes one of the most iconic metaphors in Simpsons history, the episode where Burns undergoes a series of medical tests, and the doctors discover he has every disease imaginable, but they cancel each other out and keep him alive. The doctors call this the Three Stooges syndrome, where all the viruses try to enter the same door and get stuck. This is not just a joke, it is a declaration. Burns cannot die. He is too corrupted, too unnatural, too deeply rooted in the fabric of Springfield to disappear. This pseudo immortality transforms him into something closer to a cursed being than a normal human. Another important symbol comes from the way Springfield reacts to Burns' wealth. The town constantly alternates between fearing him, obeying him, and begging him for help, mirroring real-world dynamics of power and dependency. Burns thrives on this dynamic, and the series repeatedly shows that he survives not because of his physical strength, but because the town enables his monstrous nature. Springfield feeds him power, and he feeds Springfield despair. The show often uses Burns to comment on issues larger than the series itself: capitalism unchecked, power, political corruption, environmental destruction, and social inequality. Every time Burns appears, he becomes a representation of one of these themes, which adds a new layer to his monstrous evolution. He is not just the villain of the Simpson family. He is the villain of the entire world, the personification of what happens when authority becomes detached from humanity. Treehouse of Horror takes this symbolism even Further, by removing the last ties between Burns and reality, portraying him as a vampire, as an alien, as a radioactive mutant, as a creature that drains life from others to sustain himself. These portrayals are exaggerations, but they highlight the essence of his character. He survives by consuming, he controls by weakening, he dominates by draining energy from everyone around him. And then there is one of the most revealing scenes in the entire series. The moment when Burns finds a dog that he raised as a puppy, and the dog snarls at him aggressively, because even animals instinctively recognize him as a predator, not a caretaker. This scene proves that Burns' transformation is complete. He is no longer part of the natural order. He stands outside it as something unnatural. Corrupted and unnatural beings are always feared by instinct. As we reach the end of this block, a clear pattern emerges. Mr. Burns did not lose his humanity. He abandoned it willingly, traded it for power, comfort, and superiority over others. And once those pieces were gone, nothing remained but a hollow shell, an empty vessel, powered by greed and ego. The series uses every stage of his evolution to show that monsters are not born. They are built, brick by brick, choice by choice, until the person they once were disappears completely. At this stage in the evolution of Mr. Burns, the series no longer treats him as a character, but as a force of presence, something that hovers over Springfield like a shadow, reminding everyone that unchecked, power becomes something far darker than simple greed. Burns has crossed the line. Entirely, he does not resemble a man anymore. He resembles a walking warning, a living myth inside the town, a creature shaped by every selfish choice, every act of cruelty, every moment when he chose power over compassion. And this becomes clearest in the episodes where Springfield tries to fight back, because even when the town rises against him, something always goes wrong. Burns survives, he escapes, he returns slightly weaker or slightly stranger, but never defeated. He exists like a supernatural parasite, feeding off the chaos he creates and returning again and again, no matter what happens to him. And this is intentional. The writers use him to show that monsters like Burns never disappear easily. They remain as long as the systems that created them remain. There are even moments in the series where Burns tries to be good, where he attempts to do one kind thing or show one drop of humanity, but every attempt fails instantly because he no longer understands human emotion. When he tries to run a charity, the charity collapses. When he attempts friendship, he manipulates the person. When he adopts a child, he treats it like a new toy. These scenes show that the real tragedy of Burns is not the evil he does, but the fact that he can no longer understand the world outside his own ego. He is lost, trapped inside himself, a prisoner of his own monstrous identity. And now we reach the deepest meaning behind his transformation. The Simpsons did not turn Mr. Burns into a monster because they needed a villain. They turned him into a monster because he represents a truth about society, a truth people do not like to face. Power without empathy becomes horror. Authority without compassion becomes danger. Wealth without accountability becomes destruction. Burns is the living embodiment of how the world changes when people with too much power stop seeing others as human beings. The series exaggerates these traits through comedy, but the message is still there. Burns is terrifying because he is realistic, not in the supernatural sense, but in the moral sense. He is what happens when someone removes every part of themselves that feels, cares, or respects others and replaces it with greed, fear, control, and the need to dominate everything around them. And in Treehouse of Horror, his final form becomes literal, a vampire draining the life of Springfield, a mutated monster glowing with radiation, a skeletal figure towering over the town. These versions are exaggerated, but they reveal what was always inside. Him, the monster, does not appear in those episodes. It is simply exposed. So, as we finish this story, one thing becomes undeniable. Mr. Burns is not scary because of what he looks like. He is scary because of what he symbolizes. He is the result of choices. The result of ego, the result of a lifetime without compassion in the series uses him as a reminder that monsters are not born from fangs, claws, or darkness. They are born from greed, power, and the absence of a heart. And that is how the Simpsons transformed Mr. Burns into the most unsettling monster Springfield has ever known.